Greetings. My name is Tony Williams, and I'll be talking today about my paper, which looks at the Reconstructionism as well as the Utopianism when it comes to education and leadership in general. So to start with, I believe that Reconstructionism is definitely a solid educational approach to things and in a way of affecting change. So in our text, we see W.B. Du Bois being one of the ones to exemplify this approach to education. So he felt that we should be using as many approaches as possible to educate as well as find equality. So he was big into trying to make education better, both at the elementary level as well as the adult level, for people he felt were disenfranchised, which in this case was a African American population recently freed from a few hundred years of oppression and slavery. So he was able to do this in many aspects that I hit on in my paper, of course. And some of those included activism, where he was basically bringing out the fact that things were not fair and showing that he felt education was a tool into attaining leadership. So he was able to publish a lot of papers to really get out there. So there were other people that believed in the same approach. So he wasn't the only one. For example, there was my own great great uncle. So his name was Dr. Robert S. Williams, and he lived and grew up in the same times as W.B. Du Bois. Uh, in fact, they ended up working together on different movements and aspects, one of which was the Georgia Civil Rights Convention, where a group of leaders came together and they were trying to affect change educationally as well as society as a whole. And my great great uncle served as the vice president of this group, and W.B. Du Bois was also a delegate of that group. And again, the goal was equality, how to educate a deprived people and attain equality as well. And of course, another person, which I'll hit on in detail more, but another person that kind of exemplified this approach would be, of course, Booker T. Washington. And here again, he was another person that ran within that same circle. And this is a 1906 pamphlet of an event where he was actually a key speaker as a professor Washington. And of course, my great great uncle was a vice president of this committee to help put it together. And again, it was trying to look at how to educate people, but in this case, from a spiritual background. So again, that's what I feel about Reconstructionism, is it was always about action and movement, which also ultimately can create enemies. So the second topic that I pretty much wrote about to kind of draw a contrast is, of course, utopianism. And in our text, we see Robert Owens as one of the figures to kind of exemplify that approach, where you want to make everything as good as possible for as many people as possible. So there's a lot of, you could say, hopefulness that's involved with utopianism, right? Another person that came to mind for me that I'd like to talk about, that I also mentioned in my paper, of course, is Karl Marx. So Karl Marx was also someone who basically had a utopian approach to education. So with Karl Marx, when you really think about it, his whole mentality was trying to minimize the disparities between the riches of the rich and the poor of the poor, right? So a lot of people would say it's socialism, try to put everyone where everyone's surviving. But of course, this is a very utopian approach to education, to politics, to anything, because it requires everyone to do their part and a certain amount of honesty and prudence that is hard to come by. So this is a photo that I'm sharing of Mark's house, which I was fortunate enough to visit yesterday with my family. So, because it's only about 2 hours from where I live. So with Karl Marx, his theories were good. If you really read the doctrine behind what he was trying to do, why he was trying to do it, it really almost boils down to religion, because it's all about caring for others and trying to, do what's best for everyone. But again, that's the big problem, is that it requires, for example, if you're a worker, you can't look at it and think, well, I'm only going to make this much money anyway, so I can slack off a little bit. Likewise, if you're an overachiever, you can't really look at it in a mentality where you would say, well, I'm outperforming this person, so I should be paid more. And of course, as leaders, you have to be fair and impartial. You can't scheme off the top or have your favorites. So that's the big downfall with utopianism, is that it doesn't take into account the human factor. And again, in my opinion, when you read Marxism, it within itself have decent foundations. The problem becomes Leninism, Maoism, Stalinism, all the different bad people that took the foundation and then they made it to better fit what they wanted to do and what they wanted to accomplish, which ultimately resulted in dictatorships, oppression, and all the things that history has shown. So when you start looking at some of the critics, again, some of those critics of you would say, I guess, Reconstructionism or W.B. Du Bois in particular would be two of the people I mentioned before, which of course is Booker T. Washington, as well as my great uncle, Dr. Robert S. Williams. So I wanted to share this. So this is a actual conference in which Dr. Williams, as well as Professor Washington, appeared with the governor and former governor of South Carolina during a big rally and conference, which was basically toward equality and things of that nature. So again, still working together. But you start to see things grow apart with all three. So for example, with W.B. Du Bois, he became very intolerant and you could say out of patience with Booker T. Washington. He started to say things publicly against him. And I believe there's documents that also show that Washington returned that type of attitude. But basically, Washington started to view Du Bois as a rebel, as more radical. And of course, W.B. Du Bois became impatient and viewed Booker T. Washington as an appeaser. So that kind of started to show some problems there. But again, it was Washington being very critical of what he felt was radical behavior. Likewise with Dr. Williams, they were close. And over time, W.B. Du Bois started to back a Back to Africa movement, which was his way of trying to fight equality and education, where he was trying to get African Americans to, move back to Africa. Well, my great uncle, of course, didn't agree with that, because in his eyes, how do you move back to somewhere you've never been? Because all of these guys, none of them had been born in Africa. W.B. Du Bois was born in America to freed parents. Booker T. Washington was born in America as a slave to enslaved parents. And of course, my great uncle was born in America to a white Confederate soldier father and an African American mother in Northwest Louisiana. So three different stories, three different experiences. But again, no one had been to Africa. So that's where you see the split with those guys, where they started to become critical of his policies. Because even with my great uncle, there's documents that show, even books that captivate, that he did believe it was benefits in going to Africa to, one, learn African culture as an African American, but two, to also teach some of the American culture to Africans. So while he had similar views, he totally did not agree with a Back to Africa movement. So you see a lot of critics there when it comes to people within his own, race, his own Reconstructionism approach that viewed him as radical or going too far. I find both Reconstructionism as well as Utopianism very interesting, but I think that Utopianism is a best case scenario that requires everyone to do the right thing, and that's the big fallacy in that approach. Whereas I do believe Reconstructionism is better. It gets more people involved, and it's all about trying to get to equality, but from a multifaceted way by introducing culture, history, and education, using that education as the tool to bring about equality and mutual recognition. So I thank you very much for your time, and I do hope that you enjoyed this brief video, and I look forward to your replies and your comments.